You're listening to Force Majeure, an actual play Star Wars podcast. My name is Adam and I'm your host and the GM for Chapter 3 of the Coldfire Chronicles, which will be beginning next week. To tide you over until then, I've prepared this short recap episode to refresh you and the cast and me on what has happened in Chapter 2. On an old warship, travelling through hyperspace, we rejoined our heroes. The fast-talking Chiss Jiren, the surly human mechanic Lassa, the privileged human hunter Oberyn Brick, and the silent but violent Mirialan Agatha. With the aid of the Chadrafan slave Prinkle, our heroes had rescued their mentor, Pyjak, and fled the prison moon of Daxos, leaving the terrifying 10th brother behind them. Their escape, however, had not come without a cost. Pyjak had been turned against them at the end by 10th brother, who revealed Pyjak to be a surviving clone trooper and triggered the latent Order 66 programming within him. Although our heroes had survived and managed to subdue Pyjak, it made for some frosty discussions while they travelled to the shadow port of Port Haven to meet an old contact of Pyjak's and decide where to run to next. Upon arrival at Port Haven, our heroes met up with Pyjak's contact, a battle-scarred and pragmatic Lepi named Hawker Balbo. Hawker afforded the crew some time to catch their breath with some credits, giving them a night to think about their next steps rather than rushing into a decision. She also dropped a hint that Davern Coldfire, Pyjak's Jedi Master, may still be alive. This understandably had quite an impact on Pyjak, who was still reeling from the events on Daxos, and under Agatha's unusually tender ministrations, the damaged warrior returned to the Coldfire's mercy to recover, while the rest of the crew explored their options and engaged in some much-needed R&R. The following morning, suitably refreshed, the crew returned to Hawker's Bar. A deal was struck, where the crew would deliver a number of supplies to a hidden rebel base in the Lenico system in exchange for an introduction to a scholar who may be able to point them in the direction of Davern Coldfire. The Mercy was reprovisioned and refueled, and 2 new crew members joined the ship, the astromech Tugger, on loan from Hawker, and the ship's Tuka, Mr. Sparkles, soon to be promoted to captain. With a day or so to kill while the supplies were loaded up, Oberyn proposed a team-building trip. The jungles of Port Haven offered a number of hunting expeditions for visitors in search of excitement, and Oberyn had sensed there may have been a nefarious scheme behind them as well, having realised that fewer hunters seemed to return than went out. Leaving Pyjak to recover and Prinkle to oversee the resupply, which is its own story, our heroes followed the guide droid Steve into the jungle. What was initially intended to bring the group together had something of the opposite effect, as tensions between the fugitives almost hit breaking point. Lassa was disgusted by the casual cruelty of both Steve and Oberyn, and was placed into danger by Agatha's single-minded pursuit of a challenge worthy of his strength. Oberyn was disgusted with the hunt, but for all the wrong reasons, and Lassa, trying to help, accidentally shot Agatha in the face during a climactic struggle with a great jungle reptile. Only Jiren seemed to come out of the conflict with positive experiences, as he used his burgeoning connection to living things to soothe a startled pack of hunting dinosaurs and protect Lassa from being devoured. Matters came to a head when the group caught their breath after tangling with their prey, and Lassa, infuriated, shot their guide droid Steve, taking his processors as her own trophy with the intention of tracking back those who had been orchestrating these hunts for later remonstration. With the ship reprovisioned and directions to the rebel base in the Lenico system programmed in, the party bonded around the holosoap heights and depths, and an uneasy peace returned. Lassa did some digging into the agency behind Steve and set a worm program to slice into their systems and start harvesting data ready for when she eventually returned to Port Haven to tear them down. The journey to the Lenico system was uneventful. However, when they arrived, they found an Imperial light cruiser picketing the area. They stealthily made their way through the asteroid fields to the rebel base, just about avoiding detection. They rendezvoused with the rebel base and unloaded their supplies. While there, they discussed with the Quartermaster Thrall, the Ithorian scholar and Hawker's contact. He pointed them to yet another destination and yet another contact, a Mirialan scholar and archaeologist who specialised in Force artefacts and the fate of Jedi following the fall of the Order. He suggested that she would be more inclined to help them if they had something to trade, and told them about a freighter named the Costa Thabaran, that was rumoured to be lost in the asteroid fields in the Nico system. The rumours suggested that the freighter went down having stolen a Force artefact of some form from a cult of witches on the world of Dathomir, and was intercepted by both vengeful Dathomirians and a roving Jedi. If rumours were true, there would likely be valuable information and items to trade and salvage. Having unloaded all of the supplies and fulfilled their obligations to Hawker, they made their way to the Costa Thabaran, an ancient freighter of ominous aspect and sorrowed history. Making their way aboard, they found themselves trapped in the decrepit ship and under assault from enemies out of nightmares, the corpses of dead starfarers animated by implanted droid pieces and controlled by an entity dubbed by the crew as Mr. Flesh. The horrors on the ship would prove to be the breaking of the crew. Jaren had his right arm torn from his body by a pack of the animated corpses, Agatha, injected by a powerful sedative by a monstrous repurposed medical droid, hurled that droid at the same pack of corpses while Lassa was on its back, placing her directly in danger once again. Oberon had his prized rifle shattered against a wall. Eventually, the crew fought their way through the twisted abominations opposing them and faced off against Mr. Flesh, a construct of droid parts and the deceased captain of the Costa Thabaran, empowered by the artefact they had stolen, an orb of swirling greenish mists which called to the crew. Traumatised and torn, our heroes fled the Costa Thabaran with their prize and set off for their final destination, the crystalline world of Alpin. Along the way, Prinkle became captivated by the influence of the orb, and again the fragile truce between the fugitives was tested out of concern for their diminutive friend. Eventually, the crew landed on Alpin and met the scholar Vatara Kai. She detailed how her research had found that Davron Coldfire had indeed survived the end of the Clone War and had last been seen on this very planet, heading towards a hidden Jedi temple. After some discussion, Vatara agreed to escort them to the temple, and the crew set off in search of answers. By joining their wills together, our four heroes opened the path and gradually explored the temple. As they sought answers, the small group were gradually separated and each experienced a vision. Moments in the life of the Jedi Knight Davron Coldfire, moments which had reflections of points in their own lives where decisions were taken and choices were made. The visions culminated in a shared experience, where the fate of Davron Coldfire was laid bare. Maddened by loss, struck by the trauma of the Clone Wars and the fall of the Jedi, overwhelmed by anger, he became reborn as the very force pursuing the crew, the dread Inquisitor, known as 10th Brother. And as our heroes realised this, they woke up. Force Majeure is played using the Star Wars Force and Destiny game system by Fantasy Flight Games and Lucas Books. Our intro music for this season is Unholy Night by Kevin MacLeod, and our outro music remains Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale, both used with gratitude under the Creative Commons license. If you like the show and want to interact with us, we are on Twitter, we are on Facebook, we are on Instagram, all of which are at Force Majeure Pod, though Twitter is probably where you're going to find us more regularly. If you enjoy what we do and want to support the show, there's three ways you can do that. The first is via our Patreon at patreon.com/forcemajeurepod. The second is by buying us a coffee at ko-fi.com/forcemajeurepod. And the third way is by rating and reviewing us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, anywhere where you can find us. We really like reviews. It tells us that we're telling the stories that you want to hear and helps other people find us. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next time.